The former pastor of a Texas megachurch has now been indicted on felony child abuse charges stemming from allegations in the 80s. It is a wild turn for Robert Preston Morris, and we are going to delve into the story, the history, the accusations, and the potential evidence. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. All right, let's talk about Robert Preston Morris, the 63-year-old former pastor of Gateway Church out in Dallas. Now, this is described as a megachurch that was founded in 2000 by Morris and his wife, and with reportedly multiple campuses in North Texas. So there is reports that more than 100,000 people attended each weekend. That's according to KSTP ABC5. And he apparently once had a TV program that aired in over 190 countries, a radio program broadcast in almost 7,000 cities, a now defunct YouTube page that had 80,000 subscribers. And get this, he was on President Donald Trump's spiritual advisory board during his 2016 campaign. This is all per reporting from USA Today. So needless to say, Mr. Morris was a big deal in the religious community. But now, he has been indicted in Oklahoma on 5 felony counts of lewd or indecent acts to a child. The indictment alleges that these acts date back to on or about December 25th, 1982 through January 25th, 1983, and all relate to an unidentified alleged female victim known as CC in the indictment, who was 12 to 13 years old when this happened. And the felonies are described as intentionally looking upon or touching or feeling the body or private parts of this child. Now, Morris turned himself into authorities out in Oklahoma yesterday after a warrant for his arrest was issued. He was reportedly booked into the Osage County Jail. Bond was set at $50,000 and he had to surrender his passport. The timing of this is key because it was last year when Morris resigned as a pastor after a woman came forward alleging he sexually abused her when she was 12 back in the 80s. So it is possible, and very likely, that we are talking about the same person here. According to WFAA ABC 8, that woman was identified as Cindy Clemishire. And in fact, after the indictment, Clemishire released the following statement. After almost 43 years, the law has finally caught up with Robert Morris for the horrific crimes he committed against me as a child. Now it is time for the legal system to hold him accountable. My family and I are deeply grateful to the authorities who have worked tirelessly to make this day possible and remain hopeful that justice will ultimately prevail. I want to bring on right now David Ring, civil trial attorney who is recognized as one of the leading victim advocate lawyers in the nation for his work representing survivors of sexual abuse and assault. David, so good to have you on as we talk about these allegations. So if we can assume that Clemishire's allegations make up this criminal indictment, and there is ample proof to assert that, how often do we actually see this happen? In other words, public allegations turn into a criminal case, let alone allegations from over 40 years ago?
Jesse, it happens. Now, it doesn't happen frequently, but it happens when a victim has kind of hit a wall going to law enforcement or trying to get the case, publicly recognized. And so what they do is they, like this victim did, and we can call her Cindy. She's come out and made herself public. But this victim, Cindy, decided, hey, she's going to come forward, go public with the allegations, and see what happens. And we'll get to this, I'm sure. But the very interesting part of this is that when she did that, she was under the belief that there was no way there could be a criminal case because the statute had lapsed. Hey, it worked out for her. She came forward, she made public allegations, and that spurred on some action by the Attorney General in Oklahoma to figure out a way to bring criminal charges.
So you make a ton of good points I want to get into, including the charges, including what you would think is a potential statute of limitations issue, really important. Why do you think, first, let's get into this, why do you think he turned himself in? Why do you think he surrendered himself? The first thing I thought was, did he, right? The idea that Diddy turned himself into New York authorities, hoping, that maybe he would get bond and he could be on house arrest. Obviously, that was a federal case, very different. But I have to imagine that is why a criminal defendant surrenders themselves, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, he could put up a fight and say, "I'm not going to surrender," and then what happens? They come after him in Texas or wherever he's at, and they arrest him there, and then he's extradited to Oklahoma, where these charges are pending, and really all it does is he avoids the inevitable for a few weeks or months, and so I think most criminal defense lawyers will tell their client, "Hey, this is inevitable. Go surrender, get bonded out." And then, you can come back to Texas and then we'll deal with the charges.
By the way, for true crime fans out there, got to call this out. Megyn Kelly has a truly gripping and incredible investigative documentary out on her YouTube right now. The disappearance of baby Lisa Irwin, that has been a mystery for more than a decade. Who took her from her crib in the middle of the night? Could she possibly still be alive? Megyn Kelly is taking you back inside the case in a special new 5-part series, Megyn Kelly Investigates. She interviews baby Lisa's parents, other key players in the case, and through hidden cameras, brings the first ever comments from one of the men at the center of the story. Deep reporting, expert analysis, Megyn Kelly Investigates on the disappearance of baby Lisa. All 5 episodes are available now on the Megyn Kelly Show's YouTube channel and podcast feed, and you can also find out more at megynkelly.com. I want to ask you this. So Oklahoma Attorney General Gentner Drummond issued the following statement after the release of this grand jury indictment. And it says, "There can be no tolerance for those who sexually prey on children. This case is all the more despicable because the alleged perpetrator was a pastor who exploited his position. The victim in this case has waited far too many years for justice to be done." And with that, as you mentioned, his office indicated that the statute of limitations doesn't apply because Morris was allegedly not residing or inhabiting Oklahoma at any time. David, explain to us how that works.
Jesse, I did a deep dive on this because it's highly unusual for any state to be able to prosecute a crime like this that occurred more than 40 years ago. I mean, let's face it, whatever the statute of limitations is, it's not 40 years, okay? And so what happened here is the Oklahoma Attorney General, when they saw that Cindy had come forward, she saw that these allegations had merit to them. They dug deep and they tried to find a way where they could charge Morris. And what they came up with was this archaic criminal statute that's been on the books forever. And what it said was, if you commit a crime in Oklahoma and you flee the state, the statute of limitations is told or paused until such time that you come back into the state of Oklahoma and we can arrest you. And it's truly, this was a law that was enacted back in the days of outlaw cowboys. You think Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid, they'd come in, they'd rob trains, they'd flee the state of Oklahoma, they'd go to Texas or wherever. And that's why this law was put on the books. Well, now in 2025, they're going to use this same law to say that Morris committed the crimes in the 80s, fled the state of Oklahoma, and now that the victim has come forward, they can charge him with these crimes.
And to be clear, that doesn't happen. You don't see that in other states?
No, this is highly, highly unusual. I mean, they dug deep to find this statute, and it's going to be a huge fight. They're going to have a huge legal fight over whether or not this is a fair application of that law.
And by the way, talking numbers here, he says he faces up to 20 years in prison for each of the 5 charges. Your experience, I mean, what are we talking, 100 years in prison? If this goes to trial, he's convicted. You have the same alleged victim, different instances, different points in time, different dates. Is it that that's what he could be looking up? I mean, essentially the rest of his life in prison, or would they congregate it together and say, 20 years in total, all runs concurrently together? I know we're getting far down the road here because we don't even know what the evidence would necessarily be. We'll talk about it, but is that fair to say that he could be facing 20 to 100 years in prison?
Well, he is facing, technically he's facing 20 years for each of the 5 counts, but in reality, if he's convicted, I think, most judges, most courts are going to sentence him anywhere from, 5 to 15 years if he's convicted on all 5 counts. He's facing a significant prison time, whether it's 5, 10, 15 years. He's facing some serious punishment.
So let me get into more of the specifics of the accusations, or what we think they were. So if we assume that CC in the indictment is Cindy Clemenshire, then let's try to put that together. So this all started in a blog post on the Wartburg Watch. It was an alleged, again, this was last year, that Cindy, at 11 years old, and her family met Mr. Morris at a youth revival back in 1981 when he was 20 years old, a traveling evangelist, married to his wife. But on Christmas night, December 25th, 1982, so this is when she was 12 years old, the Morris family, according to her, came to visit, and in a room, he allegedly told her to close her eyes and then proceeded to touch her breasts and felt under her panties and warned her never to tell anyone because, quote, it will ruin everything, and that he repeated this alleged abuse until 1987 in Texas and Oklahoma. And there's even a claim that he tried to have sex with her when she was 16 years old. And she claimed both families knew what was going on, that she sought counseling at one point. And then in 2005, according to her, she tried to file a lawsuit, but Morris's attorney replied that it was her fault for being, quote, flirtatious. She apparently asks for $50,000, came back with $25,000 if she signed an NDA, but she refused. Again, this is all on that blog post. Now, Cindy apparently told USA Today about what she came forward and why she came forward now, saying, I've always just trusted that God's timing would take it wherever it needed to go. Why hide? Now, David, this is her account. Assuming the statute of limitations is resolved in the prosecution's favor and this case can proceed, this is still a very old case. Do you think that there are challenges for prosecutors in proving all this? Are there issues with her as a key witness? Talk to me about what you think there.
It would have been, but there's one critical fact that took place that changed everything. And that's when Cindy came forward in 2024 and said, hey, this happened to me when I was 12, 13, 14 years old. The Morris, the perpetrator, issued a statement in which he admitted to it. You
want me to get more specific? Would you like me to lay out what he said? Let me lay this out.
Yeah.
So he apparently tells the Christian Post, and I was going to get to this later, but I'm glad you brought it up now. He tells the Christian Post, when I was in my early 20s, I was involved in inappropriate sexual behavior with a young lady in a home where I was staying. It was kissing and petting and not intercourse, but it was wrong. This behavior happened on several occasions over the next few years. In March of 1987, the situation was brought to light, and it was confessed and repented of. I submitted myself to the elders of Shady Grove Church and the young lady's father. They asked me to step out of ministry and receive counseling and freedom ministry, which I did. Since that time, I've walked in purity and accountability in this area. And he explained that he ultimately returned to the church in 1989, allegedly had the blessing of the female's father and the elders of the ministry, even claiming that he met with the female and her family, adding, I asked their forgiveness and they graciously forgave me. And according to CBS, he also allegedly admitted during a sermon in 2014 that he was, quote, sexually immoral. And we'll talk a little bit more about Gateway Church in a second, but David, again, going back to that, I mean, that admission, how can that be used against him? But it is interesting he never mentioned age.
He refers to her as a young lady when she was 12 when it started. So, you know, he's still not coming to grips with what he did, which was a sexual abuse. He's trying to portray this as, oh, gee, I cheated on my wife and I had an affair and it was wrong. But his admission absolutely comes back to haunt him. And I think truly that's why the Oklahoma Attorney General figured out a way to bring these charges against him, because they had his admission. Like you said, very, very difficult case if it's just he said, she said with nothing else going back 40 years. Really difficult case. But when he comes out and makes,
why would he admit it?
I think he admitted it. I don't know for sure. I think he got bad advice and they said, hey, there's no way they can bring criminal charges against you at this time. So why don't you, do the right thing and say something happened and move on and put and this whole thing will die a slow death. And I think once he did that, the Oklahoma Attorney General said, oh my God, he just admitted it. How do we charge this guy? We have his admission.
Now I'm sure his lawyers will say it's not an admission. that everybody's looking at it the wrong way, and that this is a alleged admission, is alleged confession, not quite what they're saying. They might be saying it provides different context, but we'll see that point. I wanted to ask you about Gateway Church. So this is interesting because Gateway Church released the following statement to CBS News Texas. We are aware of the actions being taken by the legal authorities in Oklahoma and are grateful for the work of the justice system in holding abusers accountable for their actions. We continue to pray for Cindy Clemishire and her family, for the members and staff of Gateway Church, and for all of those impacted by this terrible situation. Now, as I mentioned, when she went public with those allegations against Morris last year, again, he comes forward and makes this statement to the Christian Post, which we've been talking about. But there was fallout last year. So here's the thing. Gateway Church elders, they acknowledged that Morris had confessed to having an affair, but not that he abused a minor. And people ended up protesting outside the church. And originally, the church said in a statement on WFAA TV that Morris, quote, had been open and forthright about a moral failure he had over 35 years ago. And, quote, there have been no other moral failures. Later on, after his resignation, the elders released a statement. Quote, we regret that we did not have the information that we now have. For the sake of the victim, we are thankful this situation has been exposed. We know many have been affected by this. We understand that you are hurting, and we are very sorry. It is our prayer that in time, healing for all those affected can occur. Now, according to USA Today, a law firm then conducts an independent investigation into the allegations, in which they reportedly collected almost 800 gigabytes of data, reviewed thousands of pages of documents, conducted numerous interviews, and in the end, the church removed several elders. And Morris's own son and daughter-in-law and executive pastor, they stepped down. And then you have Elder Tra Wilbanks tell the congregation during a live stream service that there were one group of people that absolutely knew that Cindy was 12 years old when she was allegedly abused, and another group that had information but essentially turned a blind eye. And he added, what happened to Cindy Clemishire was heartbreaking and vile. We denounce sexual abuse in all of its forms, and we feel deep sorrow for those who have been victimized by such despicable actions. As an elder, I did not know the truth, and frankly, like many of you, my wife and I are shocked, devastated, and grieving. I'd like to express my personal compassion for Cindy Clemishire. I can't imagine carrying a burden like that for so many years, and I want to say to you, Cindy, I'm so sorry. And according to Wilbanks, the investigation by this law firm didn't result in any further allegations against Morris, but you can see the fault. Now, David, I'm made of questions here. First of all, is it standard for an outside law firm to do an investigation like this?
It is, because if this church wants to have any credibility at all, and believe me, their conduct going back in time is despicable. And so the new leaders of the church realized, hey, we covered it up in the past. No matter what we say in 2025, no one's going to believe us. We need to get to the bottom of this. And what entities do, religious and otherwise, they'll hire an outside law firm to conduct a full-scale investigation where everyone has to cooperate. And now a lot of times they'll keep those findings to themselves. They'll keep it quiet. They won't announce it publicly. In this case, the church said, we're gonna kind of announce what came of this, and that there was fallout and people were fired and disciplined as a result. I mean, good for them for doing that. Should have done it a long time ago.
What do you make of the departures?
I think this is, look, Jesse, this has been going on for decades, and we hoped it would have come to an end. Religious entities covering up the sexual crimes of their leaders, of pastors, of youth leaders, of people like Robert Morris. They knew in 1989 that he did this. They did nothing. They put him on a sabbatical for 2 years and then brought him back. They knew in 2005 he did this to a minor, and they kind of shrugged it off. And the lawsuit, they said, oh, if we're going to settle the case, it's got to be an NDA. But they were aware of those negotiations, and they did nothing. So finally now, when it all comes out and they have nowhere to go and they're backed into a corner, okay, now they finally come clean. So it's sad that this still goes on.
And just to be clear, from a legal point of view, these are allegations. He hasn't been convicted, and I'm sure he'll put on a defense. But I am curious about this. When you hear about what Wilbanks said, that there's these two groups of individuals, some who knew, some who turned the other way. You see the resignations. Could anyone else face criminal charges?
Potentially, yes. But again, because we're talking about a crime that took place a while ago, it might be difficult. But just generally speaking, there are people that are called, child care custodians, just basically people who come into contact with children. If they learn of a crime against a child, almost every state has a law where they're mandated by the law to report it to the authorities. And
Mm.
so if someone, an elder in the church, came across this information and learned that he had molested a girl, that they were required to report it to the authorities so the police can investigate. Now, look, there's a lot of complexity to that law. I'm not saying it absolutely applies to these facts here, but just generally speaking, yeah, possibly others could be criminally charged for not reporting it or not doing anything, and they definitely could be sued for not doing anything. That's just straight out negligence.
By the way, I wanted your perspective on this because I'm not really sure what this means. So it's been reported that this elder, Mr. Wilbanks, also indicated that Robert Morris made, quote, financial demands after this law firm probe, this law firm investigation, and that apparently led to litigation between him and the church. What does that mean, he made financial demands, if that's true?
That's interesting. I think maybe what it means is at some point he resigned, likely forced to resign, and he probably felt like he didn't deserve to go away, and probably made a demand like that he wanted, compensation and benefits and whatever it might be to go along with that resignation. That's my best guess.
By the way, as you know, there's this spotlight now on the church. So anything that's happened in the last few years, people are looking at a little differently, which brings me to one final point. The church apparently settled multiple lawsuits, actually really two lawsuits, before the accusations came out about Mr. Morris. So according to CBS, one case involved allegations that several church pastors covered up the alleged sexual abuse of a minor by a member of the congregation in March of 2018, including by not informing police. And then they apparently settled another lawsuit filed by an employee who claimed she was the victim of discrimination and sexual harassment by one of the church pastors who allegedly told her, quote, God gave her cancer to teach her a lesson. Now, David, unrelated to Robert Morris, to the Robert Morris case per se, what does this tell you in the larger story?
It tells you that this church has some serious issues, I mean, you just look at the Robert Morris situation, you're like, how in the world does that happen? That is an absolute cover up by this church. And then you see the other two incidents or lawsuits that you just mentioned, and you just shake your head and said, what in the world is going on over there? But like you said, Jesse, there's going to be a spotlight that's going to be shined on this church, and we're going to see, how they tried to bury all these things and how they handled these very serious situations. And I guess they're going to have their day of reckoning as well.
One more point. Because the charges seem to only be related to one alleged victim, and because the law firm conducted this, what appears to be a very thorough investigation, does it seem to you that it's unlikely that there are additional charges for Mr. Morris with respect to other potential alleged victims? I mean, if that would have come out, it would have come out by now, right?
You would think so. I mean, here's what's interesting is that in my experience, most perpetrators don't just have one victim, right? They have multiple victims, especially if we're looking at a 40-year time span. But this case has gotten a lot of publicity over the last few years, especially when Cindy came forward a year or two ago. And you would think that if there were other victims out there, they would likely have come forward by now, particularly when the law firm is doing a very in-depth investigation. I'm sure they had leads to follow up on and talk to potential witnesses and potential victims. So it is unusual that there are no other victims, and maybe there aren't. Maybe Morris, did this one time and swore he would never do it again and didn't. That's highly unusual, but it happens.
David Ring, we'll keep a careful eye out on this one. What a story. Thank you so much for taking the time and giving your excellent perspective, as always, sir.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.